Today, we are talking about delegation in business. We're talking about buying and selling businesses, including what to do right, what are the wrong things to do. And also, we're talking about peer groups, how to leverage a peer group of other business owners in order to take your learning to the next level. My guest today is Joh Olson. I'll tell you more about him in a moment, so stay tuned.
Welcome to the Smart Business Revolution podcast, where we feature top entrepreneurs, business leaders, and thought leaders, and ask them how they built key relationships to get where they are today. Now, let's get started with the show.
All right, welcome everyone. John Corcoran here. I am the host of this show. Thank you for joining us. And of course, if you've listened to past episodes, we've got great past episodes in our archive, so go check them out. We've got Netflix, we've got Kinko's, Activation Blizzard, Lending Tree, lots of great businesses in there. So check it out. And also, my guest here today, who I'll introduce in a moment, is a chair of a San Francisco Tiger 21 group. What is Tiger 21, you ask? It's a really interesting model of peer group business owners who come together to share insights around learning and investment and things like that. And I've got a couple of past episodes. Check out the episode with Ian Bernstein and also Stu Wolf, two great chairs from Tiger 21 who've had on before and shared a lot of great insights. And of course, this episode brought to you by Rise 25, where we help B2B businesses to get clients, referrals, and strategic partnerships with Done For You podcasts and content marketing. And if you're looking to start a podcast and to create more content marketing, contact us at rise25.com. We are your easy button. All right, Joh, I know we've been working on setting this up for quite some time, so I'm really excited about having you here today. Of course, you are chair of the San Francisco chapter of Tiger 21, which is an organization that leverages collective intelligence of its members to enhance their investment insights, make business decisions, make better family decisions. And you have held a number of different leadership positions, both in the corporate healthcare world, which is really interesting, UCLA, UC Davis, Stanford, some of the just cream of the crop best healthcare systems in the world. And then later, you went into entrepreneurship and you had some small businesses that you made big businesses, bought some businesses, sold some businesses, and you also advise other businesses on exiting their businesses. So we're going to talk a little bit about that as well. But first, I love asking people about entrepreneurial endeavors when they were young as a kid. So did you have any of that? Did you have any lemonade stands? Did you do newspaper routes? Did you get busted for selling weed in high school? Tell me.
Awesome, John. Thanks for having me on. Mine's relatively unique and also maybe relatively small and not scalable. So I think the first thing I was reflecting on this that I did to sort of make money in the early stages of my life was I had a 77 Cadillac DeVille. It's a big white car, not the soft top, the hard top. And I drove to school and we lived a little ways out. This is up in Northern California in Santa Rosa. I drove to school and a couple other kids were like along the same route. And so I basically was sort of a mini school bus. We could fit 5 kids in that old Cadillac. And I think their parents felt like it was relatively safe given the vintage. We can talk more maybe another time offline about whether it was safe or not, but they entrusted me to drive my schoolmates to school. So I picked them up every day, every school day, and along with my sister and me drove them back and forth to school. And that's the first way I made money.
Those things are a boat, the size of those cars. My first car was an 81 Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme T-top that was nice when my parents bought it, not nice by the time I started driving it in high school. And the thing was absolutely massive, so I can relate. I mean, even some of those cars back then didn't have seatbelts in the back seat. They were like, You're fine in the back seat. Like if you get in an accident.
Safety in thick sheet metal.
Exactly, right. So, all right. So you started a career basically in healthcare. You're an executive in the healthcare world, and you kind of work your way up in that. And then I want to ask you about, because this seems like a bit of a departure, but I want to ask you about Treehut. So Treehut is this company that your wife started right around the time you're having a kid, and you make these beautiful wood watches. First of all, how does she end up starting this company around the time that you're having your first kid?
It's a great story. So my wife is an interesting person. Her background is she was an MD, and then she did cancer research and studied cancer, became a PhD, realized she had some potential as a businesswoman. So went and got her MBA at down at UCLA at Anderson.
Perpetual student, yeah.
Yeah, very well educated and has a lot of great background. Treehut doesn't seem like it really fits any of those things. the story of Treehut in its shortest version is we went to Bali. In Bali, they have this woodworking that's very intricate and down to the very smallest pieces of wood. We saw that there, and I'm a watch aficionado. I have literally, at the time, I probably had dozens. Now I have hundreds of watches.
Wow.
One nice thing about owning a watch company is you can buy watches as part of the company because
Of
you
course.
study them.
Yes.
So the
Sure.
watches are
It's
part of
research, honey. It's research.
Exactly. So to be careful a little bit. Last purchase was a vintage Bruce Lee watch, but anyhow, we can talk about that.
Oh, wow. Very cool. I have to say, I'm not a big watch guy, but I was at an event with a bunch of entrepreneurs a couple of months ago, and a guy had an Audemars Piguet on his watch, on his wrist. And he was impressed that I noticed it from across the room, and it'd been a special present to himself when he had a big, I think, exit from his business. Those are not cheap watches.
Very cool. They're not. And one of the few luxury purchases you can make where as soon as you buy it, it's actually worth more on the open market. So great from a sort of investment perspective as well.
As long as you don't bang it into the subway turnstile or whatever.
Exactly. Then
you're a sad day.
Start over.
Exactly.
Yeah. So a little brave to wear it, but good on him.
Right.
So you sort of cross what we saw with the woodworking in Bali and this sort of obsession with watches. And my wife was thoughtful enough to start a company. She thought, I was sort of the customer number one. And so we came home from that trip in Malaysia and we started making watches in our garage in Glen Park, like literally like Dremel, just sort of the whole thing, putting them together. I was riding my bike.
Literally doing it yourself, making them yourself in your garage.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a minute, but at the time, every single watch. So I was like bicycling after work at Stanford to go drop them off, on the weekends at the post office over here. So it started off as just this labor of love, and it grew. People loved what we were doing. It was the time when social media was really on the rise as a way to reach customers. So our timing, sort of riding that wave of e-commerce and social media, had great timing there. And it was just a labor of love. And I think people could tell, we would do special things, send notes in the packages to customers. Early days, we started to customize the watches, write a note on the back so people would be able to send a message to their loved one through the gift. There's like these little secret messages and people would wear the message on their wrist. Still a great company. Love our customers. It's grown. It's actually still here in the Bay Area, but moved into another location in the South Bay. And many of our team members have been with us since day one. So that was really my trial by fire into becoming an entrepreneur, from working with huge teams, big teams with thousands of people. And big $1 billion budgets to, our own little thing and then growing it. So, some of the things I would credit with our success there is love of customers, understanding the customer and doing a lot of listening and sort of changing and improving to meet what they told us that they wanted from us. And then our team, but great team, and many of those team members are still with us now. So it's been a great experience, and it's still a big part of our lives.
You mentioned social media. I see you got 100,000 plus followers on Instagram, it looks like. Tell me a little bit about how you kind of figured that channel out as a good exposure for you.
There's particularly now, the thing that works really well on Instagram is sharing audiences. So we have a pretty big audience, as you noted. There's other brands that have customers that could be in a community that could be interested in what we're doing, and we're interested in what they're doing. So a great example would be, maybe without being specific, because we have lots of sort of friends on Instagram, would be like an outdoors brand. So if there's a brand that has an outdoor affinity, maybe like a coffee maker that you can bring with you in your backpack, they might have a large audience and we have a large audience. So we've done great things like throw a contest where the two things you can get are a Treehut watch and their backpacking coffee maker. Our audience sees what they're doing and their audience sees what we're doing. Both audiences benefit because it's like, two really cool sets of people, communities get to know each other. And that's been one of our most effective strategies on social in general, but in particular on Instagram.
Yeah. It's amazing how these things are similar. When I was building an audience and an email list using webinars, it was basically the same idea, like find other partners who built a similar audience and then collaborate together, regardless what platform you're doing it on, that's a kind of a timeless strategy.
Right.
Tell me about your wife. So your wife, she's a doctor. She has an MBA, and then she's starting this wood company. I mean, the deck is stacked against that type of scenario. I've heard it so many times before, right? Someone who is very academically smart, but maybe not boots on the ground kind of experience. What were some of the challenges for her? And then she's got a newborn too. It just seems
Right.
like there's so many different challenges. Why do you think that you were able to prevail in spite of all those challenges?
There's so many answers to that, but I'll pick a couple really solid ones. One is work ethic and professionalism. I think sometimes what you see in sort of side hustles in general, this was meant to be a side hustle in the beginning. So it's supposed to be so my wife could be home with our kids. Turned out to be a lot more than that in the end, big team and a relatively big business.
And time consuming too, right? It's no longer a side hustle if it's like, 60 hours a week.
Exactly. And so, I mean, that's one big lesson of entrepreneurialism in general is how much time, there's no sort of end to the time you can put in.
Yeah.
And it's not like put in time, get paid like W-2 job. It's put in effort, see if it works for the customer, then maybe get paid. And so that makes it interesting. So it was meant to be a side hustle, but I think something we're seeing, we also have my wife has a restaurant group now as well. And I think what we see there is bringing professionalism and these lessons, hard-earned lessons into areas where maybe people do have, several different things going on. They haven't tried this before. They're not necessarily bringing like a full quiver of business acumen to the business. And they're trying, right? They're grinding. I think in e-commerce, you see that in particular, where it's a lot of people that maybe don't have a lot of other experiences, that they're just sort of trying to start from really a fresh sort of deck. And they're just, okay, e-com, but maybe they haven't even had a job before. They've had, a job that didn't really have translatable skills. I think that's one of the things that you see with her and us as a team is work ethic and understanding that it's really about the customer and what you can do to earn their trust and, earn them coming back to you. And I think so many people start their businesses because they're like, I have this cool idea or this cool widget, and I care about getting it out into the world, but maybe the world doesn't care about it. Right?
Yeah. Did you fear that at all before you started the business? Because you said you went to Bali, you saw this beautiful wood, and you kind of had this idea of, well, maybe it would work as a watch band. Did you fear at all that maybe others wouldn't feel the same way, or did you do any research beforehand to figure out like, will people even buy this?
We did do research, at the time, looking at like Google search terms, what was working on social. One thing that works about our watches in particular is the natural material. So wood, stone, they're sort of arresting when you're just sort of on the feed and a watch goes by and has, let's say, zebra wood on the dial. That just doesn't look like the other watches that are out there.
Very different,
so,
right?
One hypothesis that we had is this visual component was going to work well on social media. We also had the benefit of having had a social media driven sunglasses company before that. So we understood a lot of our customers' behavior and their needs and wishes from that experiment. That had sort of topped out at a certain number where we were like, okay, this doesn't scale how we want it to. This was actually the next experiment after the sunglasses company. So we learned a lot. We knew what the customers wanted. And so we built something purpose built for the customers. It wasn't just, hey, we have this cool idea. It was, we know we're doing this. It's not working perfectly. We know our customers have these needs, in particular in gifting. And so we thought, what works from what we've learned? And this was really iteration. They say overnight success is like the 10-year process.
Yeah,
and this absolutely fits into that, where it was experiment and iteration. This just ended up being a reflection point of starting a new company. So it was on the shoulders of another company where we'd done a lot of experimentation. We had a lot of support from our community, friends, family, built that one to a pretty respectable level. This took all the learning and it popped. But not only, sort of full disclosure, I guess, for the first 3 years of the company, I kept telling my wife, like wooden watches, like, honey, like, MD, PhD, MBA, and we're doing this sort of little, like, you've got more in you, you could do more. And how she proved me wrong was she did more with the thing that the customers wanted, which was these watches.
Yeah. Now, You know the watch industry better than I do, but there's been some disruption with Apple Watches coming along, and also with people having a phone in their pocket that they can check the time on. What I've heard is that there are a lot of watch brands that have been kind of struggling with sales. Did that go into your calculation? Were you afraid that this was a change that was going to affect your business? Because on the surface level, I kind of think like, oh, sunglasses. Everyone needs sunglasses. Not everyone wants a watch.
We still sell sunglasses just under the same brand with watches forward. So we're not, we didn't give up on that.
Yeah.
But it's true. What the transition, if you bring 100 customers in a room and you talk with them about watches, there's a few different reasons why people buy them currently, especially young people. Almost none of those reasons are timekeeping. In fact, you could have 100 customers, talk to them about watches. Accuracy of the timekeeping part of the mechanism isn't really how young people buy watches in particular. It's jewelry now. And for men, it's 100% jewelry. They're
right. Because men don't have any other form of jewelry, period.
That's right. You see the bracelet trend, and we've embraced that as well and had great success with that. But men have so few options. And in this case, if it's a gift from a woman and the woman's able to make an inscription on the watch, it's almost like the only way you can give someone now a special gift that has like very clear messaging from the other person as part of it. So you'll see guys that have our watches, they'll take them off and they flip it over. The watch won't be ticking at all, right? It's like you're 7 and they scuba dived with it and all, they're still wearing it. They take it off and they show you the back, and it's the like inscription around the gift. That's the reason why they really wear it. And frankly, like their wife probably wouldn't let them take it off if they want to, right?
How amazing is that, though, that they're continuing to wear your product years after it's lost its most basic functionality of timekeeping?
Yeah.
Although the way you describe it, I'm stating it wrong, because it's not, that isn't even the basic functionality. The basic functionality is the jewelry element to it, or the emotional attachment to it, and the timekeeping element.
Emotional attachment to the gift is probably one of the best parts of the brand.
Right. So we haven't even touched on the point. You had a newborn at home when you're doing all this. I mean, that must have been just like, incredibly challenging, having a young kid at home and trying to build up this business at the same time.
There's a great story here too. So my wife, she kept telling me, between us, we kept having this interaction where she said, if I get this company to this top line and these margins, will you quit working at Stanford and come help me with this? And so I won't list the numbers out. They're pretty substantial numbers. And I kept saying, yeah, absolutely, get it to that number. And as in the early part of that, we weren't pregnant, right? Let's say in the hundreds of thousands of revenue, she was like, join me at this number. I was like, oh, I'm really enjoying working at Stanford. I'm giving back a lot. My team is amazing. At some point, it got to be in the millions, and I still was not keeping my promise to her to join her. What finally sort of broke that cycle is she said, also, I'm pregnant. We have 9 months, and we've like met your number like 5 times.
Yeah. What else?
You owe me to come and run this for a little while. So I did take over the business. My biggest regret there. So I ended up running it for about a year while she started with our first son, and I was COO, but I sort of, took the reins from her. And many lessons, which we can dive into, but I think the biggest regret was our due date, or in that case, our inducement date was X. And the date that I quit Stanford was almost exactly also X. And the hubris that I brought to this was
one day, like
right. I support this like $1 billion organization with several hundred FTEs, saving lives all day, every day. I'll come over to this e-com business and you just give me a couple tips and we'll be fine, right?
Yeah, you're right.
That was a mistake, and I'm reminded of that mistake every once in a while.
Now, what about so direct to consumer e-commerce businesses, which I believe you're primarily direct to consumer e-commerce. I believe you describe yourself that way. Maybe you're also in retail too, but they kind of classically have challenges with cash flow because whatever money you get in profit often have to plow right back into whether it's, social media or ads or buying inventory. How have you avoided that challenge?
Yeah, we've been lucky, I think, in the patterns of growth and in e-com in general. The nice thing is you get paid and then you deliver the product. And in our case, like if we had been buying whole watches all along at, at the price point of a complete watch, and then needing to do that in big batches, minimum order quantities, we probably would have had a worse time. But in our case, what we're doing is bringing in parts of watches and minimum order quantities from all over the world, and then doing some production ourselves, then shipping. So we didn't escape that problem completely, but we've never been leveraged or bootstrapped, privately owned. And so I really believe that the reason we've been able to sort of overcome the cash flow problem are two parts. One, my wife is a brilliant genius and very good at financial management and sort of engineering. And then the other is really controlling the complete vertical. And any one of our watches, when we make it, if it's for sale, we have all the parts to make it. And there are some common parts of different watches. And sometimes, the sort of supply chain problems that we run into sometimes is different types of wood not being available from different parts of the world. And so that's been one of our bigger problems, is sometimes there's wood shortages of maybe a bestseller, because let's say teak, it can become popular. It can become popular in sort of pop culture and in like home decor and things like that. And that ends up affecting what people are searching for on the internet.
Wow.
And then what they buy from us. And so you have this interesting sort of bubble around certain types of wood. And sometimes our sales will follow that as well. So we've been very fortunate, I think, in how we've run the business from a cash flow perspective, but sometimes we would run out of different kinds of wood and have to manage customer expectations around natural products, and how that supply chain can be somewhat fickle sometimes.
Yeah, I imagine. I remember seeing another watch company a while back that took stadium seats from old stadiums like original Comiskey Park or original Yankee Stadium. They bought some of them and then they made watches out of them. So very cool idea, but talk about limited supply.
There's only so many, right?
Only so many, right?
Yeah,
right. You sell out, you're done,
Yeah, we have a project similar to that with the Bay Bridge wood. So the Bay Bridge, Golden Gate Bridge is very famous, but we have another very beautiful bridge that was recently redone. And we were lucky enough, the wood guy here, that's the big broker, called us up and said, look, I've only got I was able to just get a few pieces of this. I can't think of who else would buy it, but you guys. And so we did a project around Bay Bridge wood and
cool.
The wood's more than 100 years old. And so it comes from the redwoods north of here. So there's all sorts of great story in wood. And sort of keep an eye on our site. I think we're always doing something interesting, but the Bay Bridge wood is one I'm particularly excited about.
Okay, we're both here in the Bay Area, and I hear that. I'm like, oh, that sounds really cool. But how do you test that idea? Do you just go on instinct? Like, oh, we're going to just outlay the money to buy that wood and we think it'll work out?
Yeah. I mean, yes.
At this point.
Yeah, that is right. I mean, partially because those are relatively low risks now, just because we have some understanding of the market. But we also just look for story, right? If there's provenance and there's a great story that you can tell. In this case, we know like what mills the wood came from, pretty close to what region where the tree probably was. And so there's just such great story there that we're certain that's going to find, there'll be people that have affinity to that story, whether they're from this area or not. Sort of understanding the provenance of how a product was made. That's a very rare sort of capability for any product, to be able to go all the way back to some source, over 100 years ago, especially natural, goods. So we're relatively confident it's going to do well.
That's really cool. I can't wait to see that. All right. I want to pivot to talking about some of your work that you do advising other businesses, because another case study that we chatted about beforehand that we want to talk about was a client of yours. There's a CPA in Southern California, and she was experiencing some of the similar constraints, limitations, time challenges that we've voiced so far here today. And she kind of came to you with all those challenges and just pulling her hair out and wanted to get less in the business, more in managing the business. So take us through, kind of your process of how you helped her from that standing point.
Excellent. And this will be a great chance to talk a little bit about delegation and sort of people getting comfortable with that. So first, I'll just set the stage a little bit with the story. So you did a great job. CPA, I think when she met us, about 12 customers, and that was the max. There was no way she was going to be able to grow her business beyond that or have any time for herself, because everything was customer has needs, I fulfill them. Customer has needs, I fulfill them. And so although some of the work is quite repeatable, it still were things that she needed to do. And so this approach that I generally take when I work with entrepreneurs is I start with calendar, because time is the one resource that there's just no way you can't manufacture more of that. So I look at the calendar, do this exercise around time boxing that most of your listeners are probably aware of. But the idea is, where are your priorities? Where's your leverage? And then, where in your zone of genius? And then where's your time really invested? And making sure that you sort of move the needle so that you're getting closer and closer to where your leverage is and your most valuable, sort of functions that you can be doing. Oftentimes that's business development, selling, strategy, wherever your zone of genius is that sort of brought you there or that you need to harness for that next level. We spend some time looking at that. So we usually go calendar first, then we go to communications. We look at how are you communicating with your team, if you even have a team. How are you communicating with your customers? What's inbound information look like? So we spend some time on that. So it goes calendar, communication, and then where the big hit is in delegation. So what we find is once you get your own calendar and communication sorted out, you can make some room for other people to help you. And this is often the biggest thing that I hear from people when they go to get help, but aren't successful, is I tried that and the firm or team or person who was meant to help me failed. That's commonly what you hear.
Right. They had a bad experience previously with
exactly.
delegating
I
to
tried
someone.
this.
Yeah.
It was all in. It didn't work because they weren't great. And almost always, when you do the tear down and you look at the real story that happened, that leader wasn't prepared for delegation. It's one of the hardest things to figure out. You have to understand yourself very well, what you can and can't delegate without sort of going a little crazy. And you have to understand all your team members really well. And you have to understand each task very well. And so this is where we really get into the metamorphosis, I think, of leaders, and where they start to achieve real freedom is when they can start to, one, harness their own sort of world that they control, but then start handing pieces of that puzzle. There's a great article, an HBR article. I can send it to you if you want to link it into the notes.
Sure.
It's called Giving Away Your Legos. And it does a great job talking about usually what brought entrepreneurs or leaders great success is they built Legos. It's like, here's the resources over here, and here's what I want to build. And I take Legos and I build this cool thing, and people love it. And there's some margin in there, and we get to keep doing it. What the article states is that in order to really grow a business, and we can talk a little bit about exiting a business in a moment, but the first thing you need to do is grow and get yourself out of the business. You need to start giving those Legos away. So you need, if you're building a little house, you need a window builder, you need a wall builder, you need a roof builder, and you need to be the one who says, okay, this is a great house, but you're not building every little piece of it anymore, and you need to feel comfortable with that. So this is where we really, I think, find benefit for the people that we do consulting with, is when we get to the leverage component, and you can see it really changing their lives. And when you go back to this CPA customer, she was able to hand off every single duty that she was actively doing for her customers, minus her interface with the customers, because the trust was with her. But she was able to delegate all of the actual work to other people. And in her case, several people who are offshore. She was able to, over less than a year, double the number of customers that she had and the top line revenue of her business, while also she went and traveled and went completely off the continent with her husband for the first time ever, while doubling the size of her business. So that's the power of delegation. And then if you take that story to the final iteration, she also realized the real value in her business as it was growing and it had great margins, was to sell that business to someone who could grow it even bigger. And so she was able to exit that business at just life-changing numbers that she never would have thought of. And she was able to do all of that in less than 2 years.
Wow. That's amazing. I'm curious though, it sounds like there's a lot of kind of fundamentals that she hadn't put in place yet. And what was it that made you suspect that she was capable of going on this journey with you? Because there's some business owners that they may say that they'd like to do this, but when push comes to shove, they can't, or they won't, or they decide it's not for them. So what was it that you saw that spark that she had the potential?
I think for her, there's a few fundamentals that I'll reflect on that she had. One is people try this on their own. They try to grow more. Like, I can grow more. I can just give less to each customer and I can get 2 more customers. So I could have 14. So oftentimes people have to go through the experience of trying to solve scaling or getting ready for an exit on their own and realize, okay, like fundamentally, I thought I could do it myself. I went through maybe a couple of years of trying to do it myself, and I didn't achieve the goals that I wanted to achieve. So oftentimes it's this spark that I know what I'd like to achieve, and I've tried it. And now I realize I'd like to have help to do that. So people go searching for a coach, a consultant, someone beside them that's, sort of traversed this path before. So that was true. And then in this case, this is a relatively young woman. It was a relationship that she had, a personal relationship. She wanted to be able to get married and spend time together with her fiance, and I think now husband. I don't know. It's in the last few days she was meant to be married somewhere, not in America, while the team is watching her business. She knew fundamentally that she was giving so much time to this that it was putting her personal, the one relationship she really cared about, in jeopardy. That's at one stage of life. I think we see something else but similar at another stage of life where people have events. People generally a little older, in their 50s and 60s, they have a health event, or someone near them has a health event, and they realize they want control of their time, which by definition, delegation and being able to give away your leg is important for that. So oftentimes it's, for younger people, what we see is this: I've tried it, I know what I want to do, but I haven't been able to get there. Help me scale and potentially exit. And then as we look at maybe the other end of the story arc, it's this sort of realization there's only so many days, hours, weeks, months, years left in my sort of healthy living. And I want to, this idea, America has this ideal of work, retire someday. What we see in the customers that are really successful with us is they've earned it, and they know that they'd love to withdraw from their business and have more time, personal freedom, but they don't know how to get there. And so that fits into the idea of that final transition from owner to more like a board member, having a lot of influence and control on the business. And from that vantage point, being able to see who the perfect person would be to buy your business and hand it off to the next sort of generation for your business.
Yeah. I was thinking about asking you a question about exiting specifically, but it occurred to me that everything we're talking about here really is about building a business that is ready to be exited, because you're talking about delegation and putting team members in place and all that kind of stuff. But any other thoughts on how to prepare a business to make it ready to be exited? Because I know you have bought and sold businesses and helped clients with that as well. So any other thoughts on that, on exiting specifically?
2 things that are interesting, like really sort of juicy tidbits when you're going to buy from someone, is you talk with them, or you sort of check out social media, and you can see they're sort of on a boat all the time. That person figured out delegation, and they're on a so there's some great revenue and margins happening.
And they have an AP on their watch, on their wrist. Probably.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So when you see that sort of lifestyle component of a seller, that's almost certainly a business where the seller's figured out delegation. They've scaled it to a certain place. They've achieved remarkable freedom and this ability to not be enmeshed in the day-to-day. When we see a business like that, you also usually will see a management team that's like also ready for the next chapter, right? They have great ideas. They're sort of ready to go. But the boss, the guy who sort of used to bring all the energy, is like, or woman, is out on a boat somewhere. Mm-hmm. So those are great businesses to buy. And I think those are also businesses that have great leaders that have usually built a great culture where they've delegated the right jobs to the right people, brought joy into the culture. If you've got this prickly culture where nobody trusts that anything can get done until they talk to the boss because they might get somehow injured, you're probably not out on your boat. You're like taking calls and dealing with all the friction that you created by your leadership style. So that's a lot of what we believe makes a difference in our customers. We look for this sort of joyful culture and this capability to delegate. And a lot of people think, oh, I'm a great delegator. Like I've got a chief of staff, I have this, that, but the trust and the delegation stops at that one or two people. So that's also something we look for. Customers who have harnessed delegation, but they haven't actually scaled it out to the level that it could be scaled out in the organization.
Got it. I want to also ask you about Tiger 21 because we teased in the beginning. We talked about these peer groups. So first of all, for those who haven't heard of it before, what is it? Why do people join it?
The thing that's probably least visible, if you look at all of Tiger's, what they share out in the world, this is sort of the secret sauce I'd love to share with your listeners, is there's a moment in the transition from being an entrepreneur to being a person who harnesses and grows wealth, that Tiger 21 is the premier organization in the world that understands that moment. We just had our chair retreat, and Michael Sonnenfeld, the founder of Tiger 21, he was exploring this concept. If you're selling your business and you have enterprise value, let's say $20 million, that's the dollar number that Tiger looks at to say, like, okay, like you've achieved wealth. The money is actually the least important thing that we look for in members. What we look for is people are going to contribute to their peers in this experience. And oftentimes, if you think about entrepreneurialism and this sort of pivoting and changing and constantly reacting to the market and to your customers, and then you think a little bit more about investing, if you take that same behavior that's made you a success into the investing world, and I'm actually an example of this, I could talk more about it maybe another time. But when we first, when our business was growing, we had these great margins, we were just deploying capital in some of the most random and least productive ways, unfortunately. And my wife joined Tiger 21, has been a member for about 5 years now. And one of the big things that our family and that she has learned is find your zone of genius as it relates to investing and then stick with it. This idea of diversification makes a lot of sense, but it doesn't mean go buy real estate, go do venture capital, go do this.
Right.
You've got to find a lane and you've got to find other people that are in that lane. And then you can develop your acumen and hopefully sort of calm down some of those entrepreneurial instincts to be more consistent and to be more focused on sort of the long game. And so this moment of, I've been a great entrepreneur, I've built this great organization and community, now I'm ready to exit it. That's your people are in Tiger 21. That's where you're going to find them, because that's who else is in Tiger 21, is those people that have basically achieved great value add, in the world. And that's wealth can be, sort of a measurement of what you've brought to benefit other people. And then you get rewarded for that. And so Tiger 21 really begins at that moment where you move from entrepreneur to that next phase of your life. And some people think of it as like the graduate school of life. There's great peer groups that serve entrepreneurs. Tiger 21 is the peer group that serves the people to help them learn from other peers who have now moved on to that next level. And it's just really an amazing experience.
All right, we're getting short on time, but I want to ask you, as I've gotten involved in entrepreneurs organization here in San Francisco and served as moderator of my forum and served on the board, one of the challenges is leading leaders is not easy. So I want to ask you about what has that experience been like for you as you've been you made the decision to be a chair of a Tiger 21 group, and leading other leaders are used to being the boss, used to being the person who's in charge.
It's a great point. And the thing that works for me, at least, and I see it in many of the other Tiger groups, and I'm almost certain it's true for you too, John, is this idea of servant leadership. The idea isn't, hey, you guys, you're over there and you need to get over here. For me, and I think for many Tiger chairs, it's really, what can you learn from your other peers in this group? How can I facilitate a great conversation that benefits you on initiatives that you have and decisions that you need to make? So it is a form of leadership, but it's really in the service of your members to be able to achieve what they need to achieve and to be able to develop that bond with the other people in the group, their peers, their personal board of directors. That's where the magic happens.
Yeah. All right. Final question. I'm a big fan of gratitude. And if you look back at your career, your journey, and you think about who you would acknowledge, who you would shout out for helping you along in that journey, what are the peers, what are the contemporaries, any mentors, any members of peer groups you've been a part of that you would just want to acknowledge for helping you in your journey?
I'll keep it as short as I can, but there's two big shout outs. And this one seems like a cop out, but in my case, it's not. I'm just going to say my parents gave me so much autonomy and let me learn a lot of my own lessons from a very young age. And I think what they did was really special. And I think maybe they were a little bit sort of counterculture in the way that they raised me and my sister and siblings. So I just, great respect and thankfulness to both of my mom and my dad. And they still continue to do this, provide great support and autonomy at the same time. And I think that's something we're trying to instill in our sons as well. So mom and dad. And then I'll pick one nurse just because there's a really cool story, brief story. I had left UCLA. I was emboldened with all the great things we'd done there. And I went to a small rural hospital. And to the point you were making earlier, there were some very specific initiatives that the board had given me to deploy in this hospital. And I knew how to do it. I had the guidebook from UCLA. We'd done similar things before. And I basically brought the book, I was like, this is the roadmap. This is what we're going to do. Now, 500 person team, 7-person team, right? So the road book was pretty much useless. And I was banging my head against this thing. And I thought I was just this amazing leader as a young man. And one of the nurses, Ida was her name, took me aside and she said, there's been 3 different leaders through this department in the last 3 years. And you're faced with a choice. You can be like those guys and you can keep running your program, or you can work with us who've worked here. She had actually been born in that same hospital. You can listen to us. You can be the advocate for us. You can bring initiatives forward and you're going to be listened to in a way that we can't be. And if you harness that, you're going to be able to be the best leader that's ever been here. And we're going to be able to do these things, but we won't be able to do them otherwise. You won't be here. And that I ended up being there 5 years. This is in Bar Harbor, Maine, like just really an amazing experience. And a lot of the credit that I give for that transition and embracing servant leadership was because Ida took me aside and had that frank, she really leaned in and had that conversation with me. I'd be a different leader today if it weren't for her.
Takes some courage to speak up like that and say that.
She is a badass woman. I have to tell you, there's lots more stories.
Mainers, they tell it like it is, right?
Yeah, that's right.
They're kind of fiercely independent. All right. I lied. One last question. You said you own hundreds of watches. If you had to pick a favorite, not one of your own from Treehut, which would it be?
So I have a watch that is either the exact same vintage and exact same watch that Bruce Lee wore. It's either his watch, which is what it's meant to be, or it's a watch from that era that's exactly like the watch that he wore. And so I'm not certain of the provenance, but basically our son is named Bruce. My wife and I, it's a Seiko 6139, which is not a fancy watch, but at the time it was. And it's not worth so much. It's probably worth, less than a few $1,000s. If it is his watch, if there was some way of proving that, it'd obviously be worth more. But this is a really beautiful watch. It's from a very certain specific era. There's not that many of them, and I was able to get my hands on one. So Bruce Lee sort of shines brightly in our family. I actually asked my wife to marry me under the Bruce Lee statue in Hong Kong Harbor. And we named our son Bruce. So there's all these touch points with Bruce Lee. And then I have a watch that's at the very minimum exactly the watch that he wore. It has the band is metal and has each one is sort of a half circle. So the watch itself and the dial is pretty striking, but the band itself is also very unique. So it's just a watch I love, and I'm sort of proud to have it.
Wow, that's really cool. All right, Joe, this was great. Where can people go to learn more about Treehut and you and the work that you do?
Treehut.co. That's our watch brand that we're talking a little bit about here. So thanks for that. If you want to learn about our work with being able to help you sell your business, it's Pacifica Partners. It's based down in San Diego, but you can find me in my little bio down there. And then Remarkable Freedom is the work that I do to help people delegate in their businesses and find freedom. And people can find me on that site as well.
Excellent, Joe. Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, John. I really appreciate you. Great chatting with you.
Thanks for listening to the Smart Business Revolution podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.